Hey, everybody. Welcome. Your saltwater guide, Captain Dave Hansen. We got a great show for you today. As usual, we have my good buddy, Michael Folks, Inside Sport Fishing in the History of Sport Fishing, always co-hosting with me on Tuesdays. And then today we have a super special guest. We got Tammy Ebbets, and she has a story, gang. I can tell you, if it wasn't for her, Michael wouldn't have been able to put together this phenomenal series, The History of Sport Fishing. So we got all kinds of things to talk to Tammy about, gang. And you guys all get to listen as Michael and I have a long conversation with Tammy about the history of sport fishing and the history of Tammy's life. So it's going to be a good show today. So kick back, relax, go find whatever you need to have some popcorn or something to drink, because this is going to be a phenomenal show, and we're going to celebrate fishing on this show today like we do every Tuesday. So Tammy, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Dave, for having me. It is a complete honor to be here. A lot of fun. Michael has told me so much about what you've done and what your family's done for the sport and how much you've worked to help promote this series right since the very beginning, probably one of our earliest supporters, and we really appreciate that.
Well, he knew how to get me. He put me in the very first part of the show, so I was in 100%.
And I knew when you cried on camera, we were good.
Yeah. Every time we watch that, it just, me and my wife, Kelly, we just start bawling every time.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yep.
Because my dad was such a huge part of the history of sport fishing. Started in 47. So it was pretty spectacular to be included in the history of sport fishing. So for that, I thank you very much, Michael. So Michael, why don't you help everybody out there and introduce Tammy the proper way?
Well, without her, we wouldn't have the history of sport fishing, or it wouldn't be anywhere close to what it is today. It was, we've talked about this earlier, Dave, that this project has been a, I want to say it's almost been a calling from God. It's just that there was destiny in the stars. And when we first launched it, when we first started talking about it, and we're talking about the concept of the show, and we put a little website together, Tammy saw it online somewhere and called me out of the blue and introduced herself. And Tammy, what did you say when you first called? Hey, I just saw you.
Yeah, that was a strange day. That's when Michael and I have talked about the concept of serendipity several times in the course of making this film, and there are coincidences that have happened to us and different people that we've interacted with that have just really, really surprised us. But that day should have never happened. I was supposed to be on the road to the mountains. I was packed up, ready to go, and I do a last minute check of weather, and I saw severe thunderstorm and tornado watch on about 50% of the route I was going to drive to the mountains. And I said, yeah, I'm not doing that, not with a dog in the car and, having to stop. So I said, forget it, I'll wait a day. So I came back up to my office, and I was working on a magazine article. I do a lot of consulting with when I license out our photographs, I'll do the background information for an article or for a news company, whatever they need. So I was doing a little research, and I was looking for a particular marina that was in an old picture from the Keys. So I happened to just put in a generic term, something like sport fishing history or something, and up pops Michael's website. I was like, well, what's this? And it said, I read a little bit about it, and it said, if you have any old photos or videos of fishing that you'd be willing to let us look at. And I thought, oh, have I got old pictures? So I sent him off a little note, probably a couple of paragraphs, and then I headed out, and I was going to the grocery store, and my phone's ringing in the car. And he's like, hey, this is Mike from Inside Sport Fishing Films. And we start talking, and he says, I got your email. I wanted to talk to you about what you might have, what we could do. So we talked about the photographs for a little while, and I told him basically the scope of what I had. And so for those that don't know, or I don't know what Michael has discussed before, but I run a family archive, the Ebbets Estate Archives. And my father, Charles Clyde Ebbets, was a professional photographer. He raised us all on the water. We were all our whole life was either pictures or fishing. And so when he passed away, I was still in high school when he died. And his archives sat, all of his collection. He was a total pack rat. He had stuff everywhere, but it sat in the old house in Miami for probably, for a number of years until Mom moved, and then ended up with her in her garage in like 40 boxes of stuff, just thrown into boxes, mishmash, everything. And I got a hold of it about 20 years ago and started archiving it and putting it together and put on this website to keep his work alive. And it's become a self-fulfilling thing. People are still interested in what he did. And of course, his most famous image was the one of the men on the beam. I think you've got a picture of that, Dave. The men on the beam over Rockefeller Center. He took that when he was working in New York as the Rockefeller photographic director in 1932. So he had been up there for about 6 months working, and they needed to sell the office space. It was post-Depression, and they were finishing what was then the largest business development in the United States, in the world at that time. And so they needed to sell office space. So they hired him as a public relations photographer to come up there and do something that would be eye-catching. And that's what he did. And that picture, of course, took on a life of its own later. But that was part of his archives. But we have about 25,000 unique images in his collection.
There's
there it is. Yeah.
That's just such an amazing shot.
Yeah. And the irony of that picture is it's good. For 70 years, no one knew who took it because back then they never gave, there you go. Back then they never gave artists individual credit. And so it was just stamped, the Acme Herald Tribune photo. And he had a number of front page headline pictures. So that was just one of many. And then a company named Corbis got a hold of it later and started marketing a copy negative of it. And that's how it reemerged. And that's a whole nother long story. But basically, I had been working with the archive. I contacted Michael. And we had this great conversation. And at the end, I said, well, here's how it works. Here's what my business model is. I license images. And, why don't you talk to your boss and see what he thinks and get back to me? And he says, huh? And I said, well, you need to talk to your boss and see, here's what we would do. And he says, did I not introduce myself? And I said, yeah. You said, hi, this is Mike when you start. And he goes, oh, I'm sorry. He goes, Michael Folks, executive producer, Inside Sport Fishing Films. And I went, oh, because I had been just talking totally off the cuff, very casually. And that's the way our relationship has been ever since. Totally casual and just person to person, just amazing. And so I started sending him thumbnails of some pictures. And I said, well, send me your outline and I'll tailor what I have to your outline. He goes, yeah, what outline? He said, I'm working on on about an hour and a half special. He said, I'm just basically doing the history of big game fishing. And so we started talking about that. And he said, yeah, I got a lot of information from here in Southern California. And, the Tuna Club has been amazing. They were incredible helping us. And so he said, so I've got that. And I said, well, that's great, but that's not really where big game sport fishing started. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, what about tarpon fishing in Florida in the 1800s? And so we got into a whole nother conversation there. And pretty soon we realized that he had everything West Coast covered. And I had a lot of East Coast, 50 years of East Coast history covered. So between the two of us, we put together some amazing stuff, and the images and what we've been able to pull from in the archives, a lot of it has never been seen. So I just told Michael, I said, whatever you want, it's yours. We'll work with you. And so he has handpicked with me. We'll go through literally frame by frame in a topic. And as we started his hour and a half, when I started sketching outlines and some of the other backstories, he's like, well, we can't leave that out. Well, we can't. And I said, well, we can't leave this out. And so it grew and grew. And in 2 years, it turned into 12 chapters. And and it's been an incredible journey to get there. So, but every one of these topics is so important to this sport and to how we got here. I mean, there were stories that we were losing for people, of course, many of the greats that really in the last half a century that have taken us so far, so fast, we've already lost a lot of those names. But there were a lot of people that we had the opportunity to involve in this project. And that's probably been the most amazing thing, is how many people stepped up for us. When we first went, I knew that the IGFA, I'm here on the East Coast, and I knew that the IGFA had a phenomenal, the Harry's Library, and just there's nothing in the world like that for that fishing library. And so I said to them, I reached out, I said, Michael, I'm going to reach out to them and see. And he said, yeah, get me some names. Let's make some calls. So I sent out just a general letter, and we immediately got a response. How can we help you? What are you working on? And then Michael made one phone call, and Jason Schrottweiser was incredible. He came forward and he said, this story needs to be told. He goes, I can't believe nobody's done it, to this scale. And really, that's the funny thing, is nobody had ever attempted this to this kind of scale, and probably never will again. Nobody's crazy enough to take on what Michael took on with this. But I think we've done a pretty decent job. I mean, every chapter could be its own series. And there's so many opportunities to dive off after this, if this does well, to feature some of these people more, because they deserve it. I mean, it turned into becoming almost like a highlight reel. I mean, Michael can tell you he edits frame by frame. And when he's doing that, and I've sat there with him sharing screens and watched how he does this, and he's just a master at it. He can sit there and visualize how it's going to come across, and he'll take a whole section of content that we've got, interviews, clips. We'll find background photos and videos, and he'll go through and he will just piece by piece, frame by, how many frames per second, Michael?
30, depends on the rate, but 30 frames per second, 29.97.
Yeah. And he will go through frame by frame and make that content fit the outline or the story evolution that he's working on. And then he'll bring in the music in the back. I'd never seen anything like it. It was just, I mean, when you see some of these films and you think there's entire teams making this happen, and Michael's sitting there in a home studio, just, it's like magic. I mean, he's just, it's phenomenal what he's created. So I'm just so proud.
I appreciate that. But Tammy, without your written words, without your research, and the hours, hundreds of hours that you spent delving into each one of these wormholes and coming up with an outline and putting the script together, and then allowing me to take that and massage it. That's what, I mean, the team effort between what you wrote and what I was able to, and what you were able to help provide, and IGFA and Trout Unlimited and all those guys, everybody that helped give
everybody that stepped up
visuals to tell the story, to bring the story to life. So your words were the foundation.
I appreciate that. And that's what I love doing. So I always done a lot of writing. I finished a book about my father's work, and I'm working on a second one right now. But that was really what I loved doing, was the research, and to have somebody say to me, tell me what topics you want to cover. And I mean, we got into some topics that, I mean, I was being paid to have fun, basically. It was incredible. I think the scariest topic that I had to delve into was probably fly fishing, freshwater, because it was not something I had done. So my father was a pioneer in saltwater fly fishing, actually fresh and salt, but particularly in saltwater fly fishing. A little more background about him. He grew up fishing, and his dad had started him fishing in South Florida and Alabama when he was growing up as a boy. And he was never without, he became a professional photographer at 16, left home and got his first newspaper job at 16. And during the Depression, he worked all up and down the East Coast, taking whatever jobs he could get. He settled back in Miami, and that's where he built the bulk of his career. But this is a guy who didn't know a stranger. He fished all over the world. He fished with some of the greats. I mean, people's names who are in the books. He's fished with presidents. He's fished with Ted Williams, Joe Brooks, Lefty Cray. Tommy Gifford was one of his favorite buddies down in the Keys. The Smiths, Alan and Bonnie Smith. I mean, just these people that the names that we know. Al Pfluger Sr. Did all of Dad's taxidermy. And this is when Al was really first getting involved in taking us from having to keep the whole fish to being able to do a catch and release and do a replica mount. And he pioneered that. I mean, in that house in Miami. I walked through that place with Dad, and hundreds, actually probably thousands of blanks and mounts on the walls and hanging from the ceiling. And he had all these people working at these tables and painting eyeballs. And I mean, it was just incredible. And Al would go out with Dad. They'd go on excursions together, and they'd go out and they'd gather specimens for bird mounts and things down in the Everglades, or they'd go out, and Al and Dad were both real involved with the Metropolitan Fishing Tournament. So the Miami Met started in about 39, I think, 35 or 39, but the Met became the largest fishing tournament in the world. And Dad was on the board of directors for that for 16 years with people like Joe. And so they were determining the course of the tournament, of the standards. And of course, the IGFA was incredibly supportive of all that and doing all of their work with the standardizing the catch requirements and the record keeping. So he was in the early phases of that. And then he ended up becoming the city of Miami. He started the publicity bureau with two other men. And he was the first chief photographer for the city of Miami, and stayed that for 2 decades. So he fished with every celebrity that came to town. He took them out just like they were his cousin Joe. It didn't matter who you were. He treated everybody the same. And he just had an amazing ability with people. But Joe Brooks and Ted Williams and Dad were kind of a threesome down there in the Keys, and they would go down whenever Joe was in town and Ted wasn't playing baseball. He would come down, and they'd go out, and they had fished together freshwater, Montana and Ohio and Maine, and they had this idea with Al Smith and some other guys that they would see the bonefish tailing on the flats, and they'd be, well, why can't we do that? Let's try pitching flies, and so they started tying flies together and going out on the flats. And it, in the late 30s, 40s, and then finally in the mid 40s, it just took off, and everybody was doing it. And so Dad covered all of that with his camera for, rotogravure features in the paper and magazine articles. And both of those guys wrote books. Ted and Joe both wrote books. And so he was taking all the pictures for their books, and they would go out and spend a day or a weekend on the water, and they'd stay down at Ted's house in Islamorada, and they'd tie flies, and it was just an amazing existence back then. Yeah. So he was very intimately a part of that South Florida fishing history.
He'd never leave.
Yeah, I probably got about 5.
He'd never leave the shop on his camera or his fishing rods, right?
Oh, yeah. No, he always, in fact, one of the most amazing stories, you've got a picture of this, Dave, is Dad was waiting to cover General Eisenhower when he was stumping for president. He was down in Miami on part of his tour, and he was getting a physical at the hospital down there. And the reporters, of course, Dad was the head of the press pool. The reporters were all gathered around, and Dad never went anywhere without the rods and the cameras. And so they were talking, and the president was saying or at the time, General Eisenhower was saying to a couple of the guys, he said, yeah, I've always wanted to try South Florida bass fishing. And he said, I've always wanted to learn that. And so he was talking to him, and they said, oh, well, they pointed over there, and Dad was over by the canal, and they pointed and they said, there's your man. Go talk to Charlie. There's nothing Charlie doesn't know about bass fishing in South Florida. So he walks over just casually and starts talking, and Dad goes, oh, hang on a second, runs to the car, grabs a rod, and he takes him out in the canal there, and famous for snook and bass along those Miami canals. And so takes him out, and he says, he goes, well, show me how it's done. And so he says, well, what you want to do is you want to flip your plug right up onto the lily pad, and then you want to just sneak it off and let it just drop, and they'll come out from under there like a bat out of hell, and they'll knock it out. And so he says, well, show me. And so now all the cameras are watching. There's 20 press corps guys, and Dad's under the gun now, and he's just laughing, and he picks up that rod, and we used to skish. Dave, are you familiar with skish?
No, not at all.
Do you know what Okay, so skishing is it's a dead art from what I understand, but skishing, we used to take plugs, hookless plugs, just weighted plugs, and you would hang a tire or put what the equivalent of what would be a hula hoop down in the yard, 20, 30, 50 yards away. And he would get all the kids out there and we would practice throwing plugs for accuracy. Well, there were contests in the 50s and 60s, skishing tournaments. There's one that was held in Miami at the main auditorium down there, and people from all over the East Coast came and participated, and you'd get trophies and awards. But he would hang a tire in the yard and we would practice from different distances, pitching that plug through the tire.
Oh, okay.
But that's what he had. So he had a rod, and so he was a master caster. So he just stood there and he flips this thing up on the lily pad, and everybody's just like, "Whoa!" And the president, Eisenhower, just kind of looks at him. He goes, "All right, you did it once." He goes, "Show me again." And he's like, "Oh man!" So, but he did. He says, "All right, let's do it." Flips it up a second time. And he goes, "Oh, come on, can you go for 3?" And he goes, "No, sir." He goes, "My father taught me when it's time to quit." And he hands him the rod. And Eisenhower couldn't get it anywhere near the lily pad. But the press ran the story the next day, had a picture of Dad showing him, and then had this great story where a 5-star fisherman that Eisenhower was so complimentary in learning to fish South Florida's water. So that's the kind of the way his story always went. It was just one thing after another like that. He didn't know a stranger, and he just, you said, "Let's go." He's
and we're so lucky because he shot all that. He shot photographs of everything he did, and you've got like 40 boxes of negatives. A lot of them never even been seen. So it's just
I still haven't scanned all of them. Yeah,
that he was actually smart enough to shoot the pictures of fishing as it evolved right in front of him.
So what's really cool, gang, is we're gonna show you something about, and it's perfect. You were talking about catching bonefish, because I'm going to show you guys the new Go Shrimp pump from Promar right now, and then we're going to go through. Tammy was nice enough to send me a plethora of pictures. I have so many pictures to go through, so we're just going to go through that right after I show you this Go Shrimp pump from Promar. Check this thing out. Captain Al Clowers, you guys got to watch him yesterday out there catching bonefish in the back bay of San Diego, which is incredible. Most of you fly all over the world to catch a bonefish. He caught a couple dozen in the back bay live on our show yesterday, and none of it could have happened if he didn't have the Go Shrimp. So check this out real quick, and then we'll get right back into the show.
Hey, what's up, guys? Captain Clowers here with Promar Ahi USA. They came out with a brand new Go Shrimp pump, state of the art, best one on the market. Stainless steel with beautiful features like these really sturdy handles. The exit hole is on both sides, so you don't get any air bubbles when you pull on your stroke up. And the end of it is really sharp, so it goes in the sand or the mud really easy. All the components are really accessible, where you can change the grommet and stuff like that. I've used a lot of pumps over the years, stainless steel ones as well, and this one is top notch. So I'm out here to show you how easy they work, and let's go over here and check it out. So all these little holes right here are Go Shrimp houses. So you go over the little hole and pull, and it's very easy. There's a bunch of small ones right here where we're at, but there's one right there, honey. See that? So here's a Go Shrimp right here. These are the perfect bonefish size right here. But just a couple pulls on the Go Shrimp pump, and we got some Go Shrimp. So if you guys are looking for a really cool stainless steel Go Shrimp pump, go to PromarAhiUSA.com and get yours today. See ya.
That was cool, Al. Thank you for that, gang. The QR code.
What is different from the PVC
That's
pipes?
amazing.
Well, the stainless steel is much better because the edge is so much sharper. It penetrates that sand much easier.
Not having to push it so damn hard.
Yeah, he had the PVC pipe one, and we used it, and it was gnarly. Quite a workout for an old man like myself. Al just makes it look so easy. But when Promar saw what we were doing and how they could make a better mousetrap, they put that stainless steel one together. I don't know any other company that's making a stainless steel Go Shrimp pump. So I think Promar's on the top of the game. You can get that. You can check out all the great Promar products through the QR code right there on top of Michael's face. grab, and you won't believe all the products at Promar. You're using them every single day. Everybody all over the world is using Promar products. You don't even know it. From your bait scoops to your sabiki rod, all the different cedar plugs, everything Promar. You won't even believe it when you go to the website. Check it all out. And because of you guys watching the show, you save 15% using the QR code right there. Or put in the code YSWG and the number 22, and you'll save 15% on all the products. So go check it out at Promar, and you guys won't be disappointed, I promise. So now we kind of set the table, Tammy, about what you're all about and how you were able to help Michael, because without your help, I promise you, this show wouldn't have been anything what it is today. Like Michael and I talked about this many times. Taking that East Coast influence, him and I are both West Coast guys. So we were thinking big game, the tuna club, the bluefin tuna, the broadbill swordfish,
Yeah.
the marlin.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Amazing
But
history.
like you
Yeah.
said, the tarpon, the largemouth bass, which were garbage fish, and everybody fished trout. And then you were able to put all that stuff together. And I think a lot of it had to do with as you went through the box of pictures and you're like, Michael, look at this. Michael, look at that. So that's what we're going to do now for the next half hour is we're going to play a game with all these beautiful pictures you sent me. And you're going to kind of describe to Michael and I and everybody else going to get to listen as you describe what we're looking at. Is that cool?
Oh yeah, I should have sent you a lot more pictures though. There's a lot more.
I think I think you did just fine.
Yeah,
we're going to be doing good here.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun. Yeah.
So what do we got here?
No, that's Dad. That was Dad up on the beam, and that was the amazing part of the story that 70 years later we were able finally to get his name back on the image because he was such a pack rat. He had kept the original work orders, he had kept his receipts from the Rockefeller Center, his letters of recommendation, and then we even were invited by the Rockefeller family to come up and see the archives in person, and I was able to look at the original glass negatives that they used back then, and the 4x5 glass negatives had his handwriting in the corners where he would number them in a series. And then the coolest part of all was when Mom found this glass negative of Dad in the box, in the bottom of an old cardboard box that had actually gotten wet in a hurricane. And the only thing wrong with it after 75 years was it had a little chipped corner. But the image that we were able to pull off of it was as perfect as the day he took it. And he had a habit of doing self-portraits. And so if you look at this, this was one of over 200 self-portraits that I discovered as we went through all of the different boxes, because he would do some shoots that were so unusual, things like hanging out the back of a biplane, shooting a racing locomotive with a steamboat, or warplanes during World War II. He would do stuff in the Everglades, hanging out of trees at night, shooting bobcat pictures with flashes, just crazy stuff. And so he became real early on. A couple of his editors questioned how he got the pictures. And so he started this habit of always doing a self-portrait. So this is him up on the 69th floor at Rockefeller Center on the day that he took the picture of the men on the beam. And this particular picture is so sharp, it's actually 5 feet wide over my desk in a reproduction, and you can read the time on his watch. So it's incredible, the quality of the large format cameras back then. We do things so easily now with digital, but to get a picture like this, to be up in the wind with no safety net, there's no, he's up there on the scaffolding with the men, and he was fearless. He was a kind of a Renaissance man. He was a race car driver. He was a boxer. He was a wing walker. He was a pilot. He was, of course, a world-class fisherman and outdoorsman. He was a hunter. He just did it all. And so for him, this was nothing. This was a day at work, and he loved this kind of stuff. The crazier the assignment, the better. I mean, if you wanted to torture him at the city of Miami, you'd make him go sit through some board meeting with the city. But if you said there's a hurricane coming and it's going to hit the Keys, he was grabbing his cameras and out the door. He was the first man to take pictures of the storm in 35 that wiped out the whole Central Keys. He got down there when the bridges had washed out, got down there in a boat and stayed 3 days shooting the first pictures that went out. He was one of the earliest Associated Press photographers for South Florida, and he sent out the very first press photos across the country of that storm that killed over 470 veterans. And he had pictures of the funeral pyres. They had to burn bodies in wooden caskets because they couldn't, the disease in the middle of the summer and the heat in Florida, they were overwhelmed. And that was the kind of assignment that was just his life's blood. So getting up there on the beams, it was nothing to him. He loved it. He absolutely loved it. But yeah, we were very grateful later. Like I said, he passed away when I was just finishing high school. So I did not get to share a lot of these memories. These are the memories that I have. This is our family. We had a little, I would call it a cabin, but that's being generous, up at Lake Okeechobee. And our family every single weekend would pack up a station wagon with a boat pulled behind it and 2 beagles, an ice chest, and whatever gear we needed. And we would head out for a 3-day weekend up at the lake every single weekend. And we would get up there Friday evening and we'd put everything away and clean up the house a little bit. And then it was a little 2-room cabin with a kitchen. And then we'd fish Saturday morning. We'd come home and work in the yard. We had a little couple of acres there. We'd work in the yard and then build something, fix the boat base and whatever needed doing. And then we'd fish in the evening Saturday. And then we'd walk to church at the little Baptist chapel down the road. We'd walk to church Sunday morning, and then Sunday afternoon we had to go back to real life in Miami. So it was an incredible existence. But that's what we did. And that's, bass and speck and just anything, catfish. My brother and I would sit out at night and swatting mosquitoes and catching catfish off our little boat basin. So, it was an ideal.
Oh my goodness. For
you
sure.
just couldn't. Yeah.
Who's that little cutie in the corner there?
Yeah, that was my first bass, I think. Yeah. I was real proud of that. Everybody else was catching speck.
Nice.
Also, Tammy, you might want to mention too that you have put a book together about your dad, haven't you?
Yeah, and I'll show you. Actually, I'll show you that when we come back on live. But yeah, I did a collection of kind of the highlights of his work, a coffee table book, and it's in its first version, and I'm doing some editing on that right now, and actually writing a more thorough biography because his life and his work was so amazing. That's my mom. That's on their honeymoon.
Oh wow!
So needless to say that. Yeah, one of the criteria for was you had to fish, and so that is when she was 18 years old.
Oh, that's Ted Williams,
and that's Dad with 2 of his best buddies, Ted Williams and Joe Brooks there, and of course Joe was everybody knows Ted, of course the baseball great, but Joe was a phenomenal human being and actually ended up being one of Dad's dearest friends. Joe was his best man at his wedding. They fished all over the place together. They were both in the Outdoor Writers Association and traveled across the country to meetings and events and fishing trips. But Joe was just an incredibly kind human being. And he wrote about our sport like no one ever had. He made it so available to the masses. And he would mentor. I'll tell you, a guy who reminds me a lot of him these days is Tom Rosenbauer at Orvis. Tom is one of those quiet, gentle, humble men who just was so generous in sharing knowledge, but would never, you would just never know what an incredibly great person. And Joe was the same way. He and Mary were both dear friends of the family and spent time with us at the house and down in the Keys. And the 3 of them, they were all competitive. Nobody was more competitive than Ted. Ted Williams was a seriously competitive man. And he and Dad and Joe would go out and spend the day. And of course, Dad would capture all the pictures. And then when Joe wanted to do an article, he'd call up Dad and they'd go out and they'd do, whatever they were working on, snook or down in the 10,000 Islands. They'd do a lot of work down there. And so they would spend the days together. And that was a lot of fun for him.
It's a great shot.
Some of them didn't load. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We'll get up.
Oh, okay. No worries. We got plenty.
Yeah, there's more coming, gang.
I've got them on mine too. I don't know if I can share, but I've got them on mine too. So that's Dad. Yeah, he fished from the time he was a young man, and he was, of course, a contemporary of Hemingway in that era, but actually didn't particularly care for him. Hemingway was he either loved you or hated you, and he was kind of a recluse. They both fished Cuba around the same time, but he was not somebody that Dad hung out with. Oh, these are a little bit out of order. Okay, so this is no, that's okay. This is I've got them on mine too on my laptop, but this is part of what was so generously provided by the IGFA when we started writing this program, and one of the things that Michael and I both really value, and it's kind of a core belief, is that as anglers, we have got to be responsible for the resources. And, for so many years, we made a lot of mistakes early on, and we didn't shy away from that in the film. So we really owned that, and we owned the story of how we made some of the mistakes, what we learned. Dam building, for example, we thought was a great thing when they were building the dams for water retention and flood control across Texas and the South. And all of a sudden you had all of these reservoirs, and they were stocked with bass, and oh my God, what a resource. It was unbelievable. Fishing companies and tackle companies to South Louisiana and Texas to take advantage of it. But at the same time, we were finding out that in California, we were having just the opposite effect. So the dams that we were building for energy and electricity were actually, we had no idea what down the road, 40 years later, 50 years later, what harm we would be doing. So to the salmon, of course, and all of that we're just now trying to undo with the Everglades and the salmon in the Northeast. So we're in the Northwest. So we're learning.
Sorry.
Let's see. No, you're good. That's Bob Popovics. That is one of, I tell you, that's an important picture there. Bob is one of the people that just jumped up, the Atlantic saltwater fly rodders. Bob was one of the people that when we reached out to him was just the most genuine, forthcoming. What can I help you with? Let's tell the stories. Giving us pictures and everything we could want. And sadly, I only got to talk to him twice. We did a lot of phone interviews during this project. Of course, we were working during COVID, so travel was pretty restricted. But Bob was just a wonderful spirit and a kind man, and just an incredible source of knowledge on stripers and fly tying. He had his own line of fly tying that he was very famous for. And sadly, one of the things we realized doing this film was how quickly we were losing some of the names. But Bob was not one that we expected to be talking about. He passed away just recently from an accident. He was hit by a car walking home from his little restaurant, and sadly he never recovered, and we lost another amazing person. But I am so grateful that we were able to have already included him in this film when all that happened. So that's one of the things about being able to do something like this, and I think Michael has that's resonated with him. Is what a gift we've been given to be able to lay some of these stories down and share these, some of the names that have passed. We've been able to, Bill Poole, for example, Michael, nobody tells that story like you did. The work he did telling Bill Poole's story, and that whole history of Southern California sport fishing and long range. It's just remarkable, and it needed to be told. So we were very, very lucky. These are some of our more modern folks that have come forward for us. Oh, there's Eisenhower. There you go. Yeah, that's teaching him out the Tamiami Trail in one of the little canals. And then groups like this. These are ladies, and ladies in fishing was a really, really fun thing for us to get involved with. We had not a lot of people had known or told some of the ladies' stories. The first woman to ever write a book about fishing was actually Dame Juliana Burner, who was a nun in England in the 15th century. And it became a classic. It was a book that was reprinted, numerous times in the next 100 years. And it was written by a woman in a convent. So that's pretty amazing. And ladies today are, they're 35% of our market now, and they are making a name. These women, it's been such fun to follow their stories. So it started with people like Bonnie Smith, Al Smith's wife, the guide down in the Keys. She became a guide in her own right, and she was known as Bonefish Bonnie. And there's another picture you'll see with some women in pink there, Dave. And Bonefish Bonnie Smith was such a hero to the women of the Keys that Nancy Zacon, who was a leading fly fishing instructor and educator, and Nancy ended up naming a chapter down in the Keys of lady fishermen called the Bonefish Bonnies. And so this group now fishes tournaments together. So just amazing how things came full circle. And of course, people like Joan Wolfe, Joan and Lee, you may have, let's see if we got, I can pull these up too on mine if we need to. But Lee and Joan Wolfe, of course, started a fly fishing. There's Dame Burner. Started a fly fishing school and taught thousands and thousands of people. And I mean, it's information. It's like everything else. I mean, we're so blessed now. I mean, the internet is kind of a mixed blessing. It's done is it's made it possible, as you've seen, Dave, with what you do. What an incredible tool to be able to now share this knowledge and pass it forward. And being able to do this with Michael and get these stories down chapter by chapter, that's the beauty of this project is you can go in, and if your thing is bass fishing, then you can go in and just grab chapter 9. There's Lee and Joan Wolfe. You can grab chapter 9 and learn about the history, 200 years of bass fishing in the U.S., and the pictures and the videos and the things that we've been able to pull from all the different donors and people that worked with us. BASS was incredibly generous. Bassmaster, Terry Battisti, Dr. Battisti, what an authority. He runs Bass Archives online, and there's no one I've ever met that can talk to you about the history of bass fishing like he can. And he got together with his buddy Ken Duke.
I love this picture though, because Joan was such a integral part of getting women into fishing back then, right?
Yeah. Oh, it still is. So, and yeah, she still is. She is still teaching. She is on advisory board. She was on the board of the American Museum of Fly Fishing and may still be, but she is one of the most savvy women. And she started with those casting competitions. And she was the first to be signed to represent a tackle line. And when she met Lee, of course, they started doing that together. But when he passed away, she carried on their legacy and still does. He died in a very tragic plane crash. He was his own pilot. There's the Bonefish Bonnies. Lee was a pilot, and he would fly to fish for Atlantic salmon. And he would fly up to Alaska and Nova Scotia and all over New York and all kinds of different places. And sadly, they don't know exactly what happened. They think he had a medical issue, but he crashed on landing and passed away. And Joan carried on his legacy. That's one of the covers from one of the pages from the book there. But all of these stories, chapter by chapter, and that's the fun of doing it this way and breaking it out like we did topically, Michael was able to cover a lot more content. And of course, big game fishing. Oh, that was so much fun. When Michael worked on chapters 1 and 2, the Tuna Club. Wow. I mean, talk about a resource. Yeah, Michael, you can talk more about what they did for us, but they were incredible.
Well, it's been around since 1898 when they formed the club, and they kept incredible records and archives, and they just opened up the vaults. John Towski over there, who's the manager of the Tuna Club, just said, come on over, Michael, anything you want. Got up in the attics. We started crawling through all these boxes that probably hadn't been open in 50 years and just found some great pictures. So the Tuna Club, the Palm Beach Club is the same way, and the San Diego Rod and Reel Club and the LA Tuna Club and the Balboa Angling Club. It just, the list just keeps going on and on and on. Everybody that heard about this show wanted to help and contributed with what they had. AFCO, Daiwa, Promar, all those guys said, what do you need? What can we do to help you? So it's just been a phenomenally positive experience to be able to work within the industry like this and try to preserve and capture the essence of what the sport's all about from the earliest days all the way through to today. You know, it's a lot of contemporary 4K footage in there that kind of brings it all together. But yeah, it's been a wonderful journey, a wonderful journey.
Yeah.
And those that are just tuning in, we're talking about the history of sport fishing, the 12-part docuseries that Michael and Tammy put together for all of us to go deep dive into the history of sport fishing, which is way deeper than the Tuna Club, where Michael and I, that's kind of where we go and we look and we stand on the deck there at the Tuna Club and we think of the old time, the days. But then when Michael got together with Tammy, and we've got to find out about the real history of sport fishing. Like Tammy, the part that blows my mind that Michael and him and I talk about this every Tuesday on the show because it's so important. The Declaration of Independence, where it was written. I mean, what a phenomenal story. And it's because of you and your dad and putting that whole thing together to allow Michael and I in there. Can you talk about that for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, that was a one of those things where, you know, Michael and I joke about how much time I spent diving down rabbit holes because this stuff is fascinating and I love it. I mean, I eat, breathe, and sleep history of fishing, and these photos, you know, I had a knowledge that was centered on the East Coast, primarily Southeast Coast. But when I started learning in particular about fly fishing, freshwater fly fishing, and of course that's America, that's American heritage. So what we got when the first settlers came over, you know, 200 and some odd years ago, and they started settling in the Northeast in Pennsylvania and up there, and of course they had trout fished and stream fished back in England, and they would come over here. And at first there was no leisure time, and so most people were, you know, settling the colonies. But the government leaders, the governors that were sent over, people like that, and the military leaders, they did have a little more time, and of course they brought their fishing gear, and so they were looking for places to fish. And when I started researching that part of the history, I found this incredible archive that was kept by the Schuylkill Fishing Club, and it was they started keeping written records very early on, and they are the oldest still continuously in operation fishing club in the U.S., actually in the English-speaking world. So I mean, what an incredible thing. But when you started reading deeper into, and I actually read they put the pages of their books online. So I was sitting around reading these actual stories about them in the journals. And in 1747, you know, they built a clubhouse, and they started having these guys who were the leaders of the area and ended up being leaders of the Patriot movement, because of course we're talking pre-Revolutionary War there. And so these are the guys that are out fishing together on the banks of the Schuylkill River, and they're coming in at night and they're cooking around the fire, and they had some real particular cooking traditions and things like that, but they're cooking around the fire, and you know what they're talking about. And these are people, the names are, they're George Washington, they're Lafayette, who was, you know, Franklin's advisor, you know, kept us, I mean, it's all of the colonial leaders, George Washington, Ben Franklin, William Penn, William Bradford, Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. I mean, these are the guys that are fishing together. And so there were about 25 of them, and a large number of them ended up being the signers on the Declaration of Independence. They also donated a cannon for defense to the little town there against the British invasion. The fishing club donated a cannon to defend their area. So how remarkable that kind of history was tied into fishing, and we would have never known it. We would have never found it. But I mean, it's just so incredible that these written records are out there, and they're in little bits and pieces. So the scope of this film was, we were trying to tie this whole tale together of 200 years of sport fishing and the growth and the real names and the people that made a difference. And of course, the U.S. has been a world leader for a long time. There's a lot of new leaders emerging, but for many, many, many years, everybody looked to us to see what we were doing over here. So you got people like Charles Orvis and, you know, boat builders like the Rybovich and the Merritts. You know, they were the state of the art. There was nothing being done anywhere in the world like what they were doing.
And you know what, Tammy and Mike, you think about it right now, what George Washington and those other men were doing there is what we are going through right now. I'm sorry, but I got to bring this up. We are under attack right
Very
now. They
much.
do not want you fishing in the United States of America. It's such a sad, sad time to be alive. To think that our founding
is.
forefathers worked so hard so that we could be able to fish in America. And now we're so close. We're just a thread or maybe even a piece of dental floss away from losing fishing in the United States of America. So this movie or this docuseries is such an important thing to turn on to everybody to understand that the men and women that work so hard to make it so that we could fish would be rolling over in their graves right now to think that we're that close to taking away the fishing.
Very true. It's very true, Dave. And sadly, what is neglected, and one of the things that we highlight in this film, and Michael did a beautiful job highlighting this, is anglers were some of the first conservationists. I mean, everybody talks about how anglers are destroying the fish population. Not at all. And one of the things that we really tell the story of is the fact that commercial fishing did a lot of damage, and there was some overfishing early on, but some of the earliest anglers, the Shed family, your family, the Flugers on the East Coast, those people, they understood conservation. They understood when fish populations were dwindling because they were the guys out on the water. They were the ones day in, day out seeing what was going on, and they knew what worked and what didn't. When Everglades National Park was developed, the local fishing guides in the Keys, and this is the Central Keys and Northern Keys, those guides down there, they went to the government. They said, you guys need to be aware of what's going on down here with the commercial operations. And they went and they actually went up to Washington and said, we need to be sure when you develop this national park that we're protecting this resource. And so for the first time, they looked at that, and it was many years until they finally made a designation between commercial fishing and sport fishing. Completely different animals. And Michael can tell you there were so many anglers and early sport fishing leaders. The Tuna Club started regulations for catch and release and for limits on tackle and that sort of thing before anybody had even thought of that kind of stuff. They were doing that. They were writing conservation into their rules at the Tuna Club before anybody even knew what the concept was. So the anglers weren't the problem. In many cases, they were the ones screaming for a solution. And it continues today. I mean, you look at the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust in Florida. That's a small grassroots organization that started with a few guys who said, look what's happening down here. The bonefish and the tarpon was being wiped out in South Florida, tourism and just a lot of runoff from Lake Okeechobee and the Everglades, and fertilizing from the big sugar operations and cattle operations in Central Florida. And all of that was coming down into the glades, and I mean, suffocating fish and unoxygenated water, all kinds of a mess that they're still working to figure out down there with the Everglades project. But those anglers said, what do we do? How do we fix this? And those guys went in there, and what started as a very small grassroots organization, Bonefish and Tarpon Trust, is now cutting edge. And it is still being led by guys who are the anglers. Steve Huff and Flip Pallett is an advisor on their board. These are the guys that are still out there on the water, and they are making a difference every single day. They are doing what's right out there, and they don't get credit for it. And that's a sad thing.
And I'm so glad you brought this whole thing full circle, because yes, commercial fishing at one time was super gnarly for the environment. The United States of America, on the other hand, eats more seafood than any other country in the world. And we're not even allowed to harvest our own seafood in America anymore. Yeah. I mean, I want to stand united with the commercial fishermen in the United States of America also, because they're getting their rights taken away also to make a living in the United States of America. We are the most overregulated, underpaid industry in the world is the fishermen. And then the way that they want to fix this is by taking away our ability to sport fish and commercial fish in the United States of America, which is absolutely ludicrous, gang. And We work on this every day. Michael and I talk about it, Tammy, every Tuesday. We get the people involved. We the people is the key to this whole thing. We the people. And if your father hadn't taken all those great pictures, you wouldn't be able to put together all this great history, and we wouldn't be able to know how important the history of fishing is. And like when we showed that quick picture of the children going fishing, that's what it's all about. You and I and Michael and everybody that's watching today, passing this on to our children, making sure that they understand how important fishing is. I'll guarantee you one thing, fishing, the only reason I'm here and alive today is because of fishing. That's the only reason why I'm here. That's the only reason why my buddy Michael's here. And that's the only reason why you're here, Tammy. We three are examples of how important the art of fishing, whether it's commercial or sport fishing, it has to happen in America, gang. It has to. It's the root of, it goes all the way down to our core. It's our values as
DNA.
Right. Thank you, Michael.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It is.
Go ahead, Tammy.
No, Michael, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, throughout the film, Dave, we point out the distinction between the early unregulated commercial harvest. And like you said, today in the United States, our commercial industry is the most regulated commercial fishing industry in the world. And our guys, I tip my hat to our commercial guys because they have stepped up and are doing what it takes to continue to harvest fish, but in a sustainable method. You know,
right.
They're using sustainable techniques where the third world countries out there, the rogue nations, they don't have any respect for us, oceans, or anything else. Yeah. It's all wholesale slaughter. So throughout the film, we've tried to distinguish between recreational sport fishing and commercial harvest. And I think Tammy came up with the line that says you cannot hurt a fishery with a rod, a reel, and a piece of string.
No, that was yours, Michael. That was yours. You sent me that and some of the information, and it just resonated with me so much because, you know, we do it right in this country. We follow the rules. We do the right thing. We have research to back up what's going on. The problem is that the research that we have, I mean, you look at what Bill Shedd and his family are doing with aquaculture right now. I mean, it's phenomenal, the potential there to raise seafood and then reintroduce a lot of the stock and preserve the stock that we have. And I mean, MPAs, having no fishing zones are not the answer. And there's no research that supports it. And the research that Bill is doing that is showing there are so many other ways to make this happen, but it's not being utilized yet. And we have to, you're right, Dave, we have to be the ones out there pushing, and we have to be the ones out there raising our voices, because this is families. This is the future of these kids. I mean, you look at what these children are raised on now, never getting outside, and you take a kid who's raised on the water, you know, sitting on the bank. I don't care if you're, you know, sitting there with a cane pole or you got an electric reel, you know, out in 2,000 feet of water for swordfish. There's experiences that you can never get back once those are gone. And so we need those kids out there. We need to be teaching them. We need to be stewards of this information and this history and these people that taught us so much. There's every single chapter has stories like that where individual anglers made a difference.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, that second picture we showed when we were showing the collage of pictures, and Tammy's talking about her and her brother sitting out on the porch, just trying to catch a fish, slapping mosquitoes and doing all that. That's resonated in her mind. It's tattooed in her brain. She thinks when you talk about it, Tammy, it takes you right there instantly, right?
It's a perfect memory. Yep. It's a perfect memory. I can remember the first time my dad made us clean our own fish. I can remember vividly the first time he made me clean my first catfish. And, you know, and scoring the skin and I was like 8 years old, and I've got this grips and I'm trying to peel that skin back, and I couldn't do it. And I start crying. I can't do it, Daddy. I can't do it. He's like, you can do it. And so grab it with two hands, you know, and I'm sitting there putting a foot up on a rail trying, and the catfish is nailed to the post by the water, and he's got his head nailed to the post, and I'm standing with my foot on a rail, grabbing that thing, trying to peel that thing. And it's a memory I will never forget. And, losing dad at 18, being able to go through these archives and look at these pictures. It's like so many people, when they watch this series, whether they were raised freshwater, saltwater, fly fishing, it doesn't matter. When you watch this series, those messages and those memories and those beautiful stories of these people and how fishing impacted their lives, it all comes through, and we all relate to it. And I've never fished for tuna, but I hear Michael tell these stories, or swordfish, and I hear him tell these stories, and it's like I'm on the boat with him. So it just, those are the kind of things that we need to hold on to.
Yeah, my dad did the same thing for me when I got my first sheep's head. We just moved out to the West Coast from the rural foothills of Virginia. We went fishing. I got a big sheep's head, and he was showing me how to clean it. And I went to cut the tail, and I had about this much in from the tail. He goes, "Yeah, you're wasting all that meat. Make sure you get that." And I'll never forget that. I was like, I was going to cut it here. And he goes, "Nope, you get it right up to the edge." So it was like, those are memories. I was probably 9 years old, and I'll never forget. Like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Don't waste that last bite.
Yeah, no, dad's lifestyle affected my sister so much that she had a music scholarship, and she quit school, moved down to the Keys, and ended up running a charter boat for 25 years with her husband down in the Central Keys, the Fins and Feathers. And if they weren't bow hunting, they were fishing. Right? And she was the mate. Yeah, she was. Well, they sold the business, but they still do archery. But she was the mate. She did it all. She did sport fishing shows. She was just phenomenal on that boat. And she was as strong as any guy out there gaffing fish and did it all. Everything on that boat they did. And then now my niece, her daughter is second generation, married a captain who's one of the leading sword captains down in the Keys, and a phenomenal guy, Keys conch, born and raised. And they now have 2 children. And what do you think those kids are doing? They were diving and fishing at 3 years old, and just sat in their first. The little boy just took his first deer this season at 8 years old. Had to get him to where he could draw enough, weight on his bow. And then my niece Chelsea took her first deer at like 10. So just Ava, unbelievable, family legacy. Now 4 generations, and they have great grandpa Charlie's pictures on their walls down there, and their friends come in and see those pictures, the catch at Bimini. And I think I've got that picture. I've got it in the book, but the catch at Bimini, you look at the number of fish in these pictures, and the you'll never see anything like it again. And that was part of what we need to remember, is that these things were very, very special, and we just can't get it back. We got to take good care of. There's one day's catch.
Hold on, we're gonna.
If you can see that.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Can you see that? Yeah, there you go. Where you at? Let's see where we're at there. Yeah, one day's catch. That's my brother and the Fish Hawk, our little boat. Bimini, Cat Cay, all of that area, and then of course down in the Glades and South Florida. That's one of Dad's record tarpons there. He had a few IGFA records himself on fly rod. But he, it's a life. It's not just a lifestyle, it's a life. And you will never get the opportunities to do some of this stuff again like this if you don't take care of it. And that's what the fun of this project has been, is sharing that with other people. Ooh, you can get me off whole screen. Sharing it with everybody. When I first started this about West Coast history, and people like Bill Poole and your family and the Sheds, the off-fields, my gosh, the Billfish Center, what they're doing there with billfish research and tagging. And then, of course, the IGFA's tagging program is unbelievable, what the data that they're bringing into us every day. So we're learning every day. And that's what we have to keep doing. We have to keep doing it right, and learning from our mistakes, and pushing to protect this whole process and this whole sport.
Right. And the key is to make sure you take children fishing. As you're listening to Tammy and Michael talk here, we keep going right back to where we were when we were little kids. I mean, one of the most coolest things, Michael, is when we watch anybody gets turned on to your docuseries, the first thing they say is, Dave, You made me cry. And yeah, when Kelly and I watch that, it makes me cry every time. And that's me telling the story, but just had lost my father right when you and I sat down and did that. And thank God that I grew up the way I grew up, and thank God Tammy grew up the way she grew up. And thank God Michael's father did what he did for you. And you guys, we're putting this all on you that are watching today. It's up to you guys to take a kid fishing. Doesn't have to be your kid, could be the neighbor's kid, could be somebody. Take a kid fishing. It's so important. It'll absolutely change your life. One day that child will be sitting here telling their story about how special that day was. I mean, when Michael and I sat down, Tammy, and did that, I didn't know that I was going to cry. I didn't know I was going to go back to my 3-year-old little boy. And I remember my mom putting my shoes on, just like I tell that story. I can close my eyes right now. I know what the color of the counter was. I know what color my shoelaces were. I know the whole thing. It was just an incredible time in my life. Just like you and your brother or Michael and the sheephead, that stuff sticks with you forever. So gang, this is a challenge to all of you. Take a kid fishing. It's super important. It's going to change their lives. And this docu-series, if you haven't seen it yet, gang, we'll keep throwing the QR code up. We're going to go a little bit over today. If you have to go back to work, you better get your butt in there because we're going over. And because this is very interesting having you with us, Tammy, and you got so many great stories. So if you have to run, you tell me and Michael, but we want to talk to you more. we want to know more stories. Here. We want to know more about that tarpon thing. That is my bucket list fish. I went to Florida twice. I didn't get to catch one like Michael and I talk about. I jumped a few and I didn't know what that meant. And my guide was telling me, and I'm like, whatever, I'm Dave Hansen. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. When that first tarpon took my popper the first time, I froze. The thing went flying out of the water. My popper went 20 yards one way. The fish went 20 yards the other. And I was like, what just happened? He goes, you just jumped one. And I went, huh? I what? I did what?
How'd I do, Gooch? How'd I do?
Oh, it was great. Insane.
Yeah. What we find statistically, something like 45% or 55%, Michael, of every fish that's jumped is
at least that.
Fish.
I think it's more than that. 1 out of 5. I think you jump 5 and you might hook one.
Oh, that's right. 1 out of 5. Yep, 1 out of 5.
And until you go and you do it, Tammy, you don't know what the hell they're talking about. You're like, whatever. I'm a fisherman. I've been doing this my whole life. That fish eats my lure. He's dead. And no, it's not even close. What a phenomenal fish. And oh my goodness, they're so gigantic. We were fishing in that bay. I think it's Biscayne Bay or something in Miami.
Oh, yeah. Right in Miami. Yeah.
Right downtown, millions of high rises. And here's these 120, 130 pound fish.
Isn't that amazing?
Everywhere.
Prehistoric. Yeah. They are prehistoric. Yeah. They are incredible. And when they migrate in these giant schools, there's hundreds of them. And Michael's got some beautiful video in the film of that with overhead shots and stuff, but you've never seen anything like it. But you look at that fish and their mouths are practically iron and bone. And it's like, it's until you experience it, there's nothing like it. So it's there's so many fish like that. There's so many different, we did a story within the film on ice fishing, something I was completely unfamiliar with. And we talked about a charity and a group that drills 3,000 holes in the ice once a year. And people from 2 years old to 102 come out, and it's a big thing. And they sit there and they ice fish together, and it's a community event, and they're raising money. And you look at the tournaments, some of the tournaments get a bad rep, but a lot of them now are catch and release for the most part. But you look at the kind of good that they do, things like Big Rock and the White Marlin Open, and they're raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for charity and for fishing conservation and for local hospitals. They are making a difference, and they're having a ball doing it. So, yeah. How does it get any better than that? So one of the, you were talking about taking a kid fishing, one of the rabbit holes and the funny stories on this thing, when I was working on Joe Brooks as part of the story, And of course, that was a pleasure and really easy for me to write. In fact, the hard part was narrowing down, and I would leave that to Michael. I'd go, "Hey, Michael, I only have 55 pictures for this, 3-minute segment. What do you want to cut?" And he's like, "I don't want to cut anything, but I have to." And he would go through and he'd be brutal. He'd go, "No, that's got to go." Michael, no, that's got to go. But he had a great eye, and it was good that he wasn't as familiar because he could make objective decisions where I couldn't. But one of the things, the stories that we came across, or I came across when I was researching Joe Brooks, was something called the Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I have
Dave?
not.
You know what that is? Okay, so it's a really interesting story. So when I was looking at some of the early stuff that Joe did with children and education in fishing, in fly fishing, he had started a society with a couple other guys in Maryland called, in 1940, 39 they started, and then in 40, and they had this camp along a river where they would take kids out fishing, just this group of guys, they would take kids out fishing, and they were like, everybody should be doing this. Everybody should be doing this with their kids, neighbors' kids, anybody, church groups. And so they said, how do we make this happen? And so they wrote a creed, and it's one of the slides, but it's a really beautiful creed about taking a child out and understanding what it means to fish and be a part of nature and protect those things. And that Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock, and the reason they call it that is the jungle cock is a very distinctive fly feather pattern from a bird that was used very frequently in tying flies back then. And they would wear a waxed feather around their neck to show they were all members of the Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock. And that feather would be, the tail feather would often be tied into a lot of the flies for freshwater out there. And Joe was a founding member of that. Well, while I was writing that story and I saw their emblem, their little logo for the organization, and I went, where have I seen this before? I have seen that somewhere, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I was like, God, I know I've seen it. Well, I had an original among his stuff. Now, he had multiple scrapbooks, of course, and all these boxes of memorabilia. I mean, this guy kept everything. He kept, stuff from every trip he ever took. But he had an original sketch from whoever designed the emblem. Dad had the original sketch, and I still have it. It looks like a colored pencil sketch of the Brotherhood of the Jungle Cock emblem. And I need to get that to somebody one day. But that was, what a full circle. Here I am working on this film 70, 80 years later on Joe's story. And there's the sketch that he had left with Dad of the original design for it. And it just, the kismet just goes around. But yeah, these people, back then that was their whole thing, teach kids. And that's what the Orbis program does so well. And the IGFA does so well. I don't know if you're familiar with their programs. They'll go all over they'll go into the Caribbean, and they'll take educators over there, and they'll set out things and teach children in multiple languages and put rods in their hands. And of course, Johnny Morris, unbelievable how much they do. Johnny Morris and his whole organization is about getting kids on the water. They donate hundreds of thousands of dollars in tackle and in free lessons and clinics. And they just take this stuff out there and they give it away by the truckload to get these kids out there and get them fishing. So, we got a lot of good people that are doing the right thing. A lot of good people around us.
Yeah. And all of us that are watching, we all are dedicated to making sure that we get the children out on the water. My boys tell me all the time, thank you, Dad, so much growing up. Now they know how to change a tire. None of their friends can change the tire on their car. And that's all because they grew up on the boat fishing, and they learned how to do problem solve. Fishing, you learn a lot about problem solving too. Because all you want to do, Michael and I talk about, Tammy, all the time, we want that bite. And getting that bite, you learn how to problem solve, right, Michael?
Yes, sir. And also kind of piggybacking on the children teaching the kids to fish, is Tammy came up with a great line that said the life lessons that can be learned at the end of a fishing line are endless. And it's so much more than just catching a fish. It's about life. It's about camaraderie, family, challenges, overcoming problems. It's just the life lessons that can be found at the end of a fishing rod are virtually infinite.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, builds good character. I tell you, there's nothing like it. I'd take a day on a boat any day. So. They're sitting on the bank. Yeah. But the people that we, I mean, we're really, really blessed in this industry, and it is a brotherhood. It still is. I mean, Michael picked up the phone and he would call people, and they were there. I mean, they were there for him with materials and clips and, doing, I mean, Bill Dance, what an amazing person. So Bill Dance, I mean, he's a legend. I mean, the guy, he's untouchable in terms of what he did and the audience that he built early on with Bill Dance Outdoors. And we contacted him, met his daughter, Pamela, and our bass guy, Terry, contacts him. And he's like, how can I help? Come on down. Come to you don't need to bring anything. Come to my studio. Use my stuff. Let's talk. And they end up spending a day. And then he says, oh, you need more footage? I got 40 years worth of footage. What do you want? I mean, just where do you get that? What other industry do you find where you get that kind of brotherhood and cooperation? It's unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. He was a character. So incredible, man.
He is incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. He is incredible. So, and Flip Pallett, same way. Flip and Steve Huff, two of the most humble, unassuming. I mean, they're as real as you get. And, they don't hesitate to share their knowledge. They don't hesitate to get involved with organizations and to lead. And they're just quiet forces, within the industry. So we're very, very lucky. We got to tell a lot of their stories, and we're very, very grateful for that.
Got to mention Ken Duke too. Ken Duke stepped up.
Oh yeah, character.
And talking about Ray Scott starting BASS and having him tell the story of, and hearing Bill Dance talk about how he started Bill Dance Outdoors when he'd go to the network and they said, "You want to do what? A local fishing show? No, we're not interested in anything like that." And what he had to go through to get his show started, and then what Ray Scott had to do to start BASS. I mean, they're just fascinating stories, and it comes full circle with KVD. Retiring last year, and I mean, it's every person we've talked to says, what can we do to help? And I think Flip Pallett's comments at the end of his interview about how it's so important that we get youth to engage in the sport, because if you don't engage in something, you're not going to care about it. If you don't care about something, you're not going to protect it. And if the kids are on their phones and not on the water, they're not going to give a crap about it. So I think it's so important to initiate and introduce our children to all that can be found in and around a water environment. And if they fall in love with it, they're going to protect it for generations to come.
Absolutely, gang. And I got the QR code up there. If you want to see what Tammy and Michael and I are talking about, the history of sport fishing is an unbelievable docuseries all about what we're talking about today. You'll get deep inside information, more than you even got on this show, as you dive down the rabbit hole and go in there and look at what we're talking about and all the different things that Tammy and Michael have talked about today. They're all available over there on the history of sport fishing. You guys just click on the QR code. Get it if you don't want to watch it, get it for one of your friends. Get it for your children. Turn your kids on to this docuseries, gang. It's not one of those docuseries where you're going to go, oh, I wish my children hadn't watched this. You're going to go, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing I ever had my children watch. It's better than any of that woke garbage that's on Netflix today, gang. Check this out. Go and watch this docuseries and tell me, this is a challenge. Go watch it and tell me if it doesn't change the way you think about our industry, because it changed. I've been in this industry my whole life. I grew up in it, and I know I'm going to die in it, and my father died in it, and my sister and brother are going to die in it. And I learned so much about my industry by watching this docuseries. And like I told Tammy, when you touched on to the founding forefathers of the United States of America and how they wrote the Declaration of Independence inside of a fishing club, you can't get that information anywhere. You're not going to learn that inside of a school room. You're not going to learn any of this stuff. You want to watch it. You want to see it. Grab that QR code right now. Share it with your friends. Share it with your family. Tammy and Michael and I can go on and on and on forever talking about this, and we will. And we'll bring Tammy back, and I'll reorganize the pictures in a way better way. I apologize for not giving your pictures the fame that they deserved. I did the best I could. My producer next time will be more involved, and he'll help us with it. But I tried to put it together the best I could, Tammy, so please forgive me. I'm
No
sorry.
worries, man. Always plenty more pictures where those came from.
Oh, for sure. Michael said you got boxes and boxes of them, and it's pretty cool.
I still have rolls of negative I haven't unrolled and scanned yet. Yep. We're still having an adventure. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Tammy, for taking some time out of your busy day to be with Michael and I. And Michael, always you're bringing in great guests, and I thank you for that. And it's great to have you as a co-host of the show. I really appreciate it. And all of you that watched today, thank you so much. Share this podcast with your friends, because you're not going to be able to explain this to them. You need to just share it. It's easy. Just hit the share button. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any more of these, always hit the like button, and then you'll get an alert that we're going live. We do this every day at 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, bringing the biggest names in the industry. So hopefully you had a good time today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day. Turn off the news. Remember, they're all lying. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.